Isn't it crazy? I still have a Christmas tree in the back. Like I've had that pretty much all year. I just keep it up forever. But anyways, so I had a video I recently posted where it details the patterns that you see throughout history, but also in this day and age. I titled it A Forever Loop. You live in a world of NPCs. And in this video, I detail basically a compilation of clips from the media where they all repeat the same thing, and even all the presidencies and all the elections where they all repeat the same thing, and then even big tobacco ads, and then questioning, well, all these doctors recommended camels and cigarettes and said that they were healthy. And you can look up Edward Bernays, the father of propaganda, and you have to ask yourself, why? Why so much propaganda? Why so much media? Why so much education? Not actual education, education that empowers people to be who they want to be and being simply themselves, but education as to what to think, how to think, because somebody else wants you to think their way and not your own way. And so you don't become yourself, you become an NPC. And when you see, however, these patterns throughout history, you attain what is often called consciousness. It's more than awareness, it's recognizing your perceptions are being played on. It's recognizing the world that you've always lived in, and the patterns of history, and the patterns of behavior, and the patterns of justifications, excuses, of how the world interacts with people, so you can better be able to navigate it, right? That is at least the definition of consciousness that I use. It is much more than awareness. It is being able to apply principles within our lives that we live by, even if those principles are getting out of all our so-called principles from the past, getting out of our conditioning, which requires breaking through the mental barriers and breaking through what we think we should not break through because we're stuck and we don't see that we're stuck. Again, it's the forever loop. Everybody's repeating the same thing, thinking the same thing, talking about the same things. You don't become aware of that unless you take a step back and reflect, not just on yourself, but on the world around you in relationship to the self, to then attain consciousness. So, recently, I published a book, Natural Intelligence, the Technology of Peace. And I did this with Jim Gale, right? Main contributor to this. Both of us basically contributed to this together. And we have several co-authors, which are really just contributors to this book, people who are doing great work, fantastic work out there. Now, you might notice something peculiar. Somebody on this list, and it could be more, by the way, Joel Salatin. Joel Salatin recently was invited to become a position at the USDA, and apparently he accepted. I have no problem with this. Okay? If people want to help others, I don't see a problem with that. The question is, are they seeking a position of authority? Are they seeking to have more rights than everybody else? Are they seeking to impose their will on another? Are they seeking a paycheck that comes at the expense of everybody else? Now, I know Joel Salatin is basically like a libertarian farmer. That's what he goes by, the lunatic farmer. So, if he follows his principles through, he's just volunteering his time. But nobody is being compelled by him, and he is not being compelled either. So it's a voluntary system that's heading in the right direction. And you see, many people look at the elections of the world, and many people still fall to these different political games, these different theater games, which many people may not think is theater, may not think is a game. And I say it is because I'm seeing the patterns in history. But one thing is for sure, because I look at the patterns in history, and because I'm looking at history as a whole, and I'm looking at the nature of human beings and their psychology, or trying to find the truth to this world, our ideas lives on forever. These ideas of elections, of votes, of certain people in office, of certain laws that have to be changed are temporary. They're temporary fixes, if anything. If they are done, great. They help people temporarily. But I'm looking for lasting change, right? I want you to be part of history. I invite you beyond simply 4 years. we have temporary lives, and so we have temporary purposes and temporary meanings that we seek in our lives. But my purpose, my meaning is eternal, and thus my life is eternal. The message lives on, and because I live by the message, what I share here is infinite. It is infinitely stronger, even if it is not showing physically at the current moment of manifestation. And so, congratulations to Joel Salatin for being invited to such a system. But let us be aware of something. Let us be aware that the system doesn't just end at a democracy or a republic or a constitution or some certain people in certain positions of power. You got the World Economic Forum, you got different lobbies like Israel, you got the Federal Reserve, you got the jabbies, right? And you got the collapse scenario. And all of these show that really what you think you have, which is freedom and order and potential for good in the world, is not quite so. And I'm not here to bring you down, because I'm often the optimist. I'm saying, hey, the ideas we're sharing here on this channel, talking about principles, talking about truth, talking about voluntarism and permaculture, are lasting. I'm saying that this is the inevitable future. So clearly I'm optimistic. But I am saying what is not going to last. And I am saying what's going to hinder our progress. And these temporary fixes, people believing in them, justifying them, are going to hold us back. In addition to all these other blockades that are in place, such as what I just mentioned. But even the temporary fixes, even the good that comes out of this, if it's temporary because it's not root targeting and it's symptom management, it's never actually going to solve anything in the long run. We're never going to have a shift in consciousness, as John Lennon has talked about, as Alan Watts and Osho and many teachers throughout history have talked about. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for an awakening more than a revolution. See, people say, what is your solution? Well, that's what this book is for. It goes over that solution. I'm looking for a moral suasion, a moral shift, a conscious shift. And so voting and the cognitive dissonance and participating in the system is not really going to hurt us, but it's also not going to benefit us. All it does is it slows our progress, as long as we're not looking at the bigger picture. So I invite you to look at the bigger picture and get down to the root cause. Let's say you are a Trump supporter out there. I invite you to look at High Impact Flicks, aka Here's the Deal. He's got like 5 channels by now, and look where he went to the different rallies and spoke with Trump supporters and challenged their worldviews, and see that Charlie Kirk, somebody like him, would never challenge somebody like Brian Young or High Impact Flicks, because Brian sees beyond the system. He sees the contradictions within the Trump supporter. He sees the contradictions within people who have different ideologies. He sees that we simply should be free. And I'm sure Joel would even agree with that we simply should be free, right? And so it's a very basic understanding. And we will win either way. Because like I said, let's say all this momentum, all this energy, make America healthy again, nothing happens. Well, that brings more people to the cause of voluntarism. And let's say it does create some change. Awesome. It's not going to last. And people are still going to be dependent on the politicians. And as long as the people are ignorant, as George Carlin has said, you're not going to ever have true freedom. You're never going to have true order or peace in this world, because people enslave themselves. Like my video on psychology experiments that are banned throughout the world, I have in the title of the thumbnail, it says, you love evil. People love their evil. They love their own slavery. It's called mental slavery, the worst form, the root to all, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, as Mahatma Gandhi has said. So it's all there. And really, not many people have looked at the psychology of it, because people want to go with the temporary fixes, and they look at their temporary lives, and they look at their ego, and they cannot see beyond it. And when we invite people to see beyond it, they become actually free, not just physically, but spiritually and mentally, which is something that is very, very powerful. Nobody that becomes a voluntarist and understands the concepts which we share ever goes back to the political game. And that should tell you something. right? I have a detailed psychology work called Health Revealed. You can check out the trailer and the channel right now. And this work is over 24 hours of sources never done before in history, as far as I'm concerned, detailing the nature of statism, this belief system, mental slavery, and how we are essentially enslaving ourselves through our own psychology, which we can understand because there's plenty of people who have written about it in many different ways, but nobody who has brought it all together. Well, we did. I came together with several other whistleblowers in the medical field and people who have long experience talking with clients, so we don't just address it from a political point of view, but also a medical point of view, also a societal point of view, because health is everything, right? Health is real wealth. And speaking of health, then you go into food. And then speaking of food and nutrition is speaking about the mind. And then speaking of the mind is talking about spirit and presence and being able to live. And are we really living if we're always dependent on the past or the future, past concepts other people have invented, documents, believing that it has special powers, can change what is wrong into something that is right, believing that people still have the right to rule? That's the thing, is that even if you change something for good in the system, it doesn't still give anybody the right to rule. It doesn't give anybody the authority to rule over our own lives. So what are we doing in this world? Mike Adams has even said to me, we need to create a non-party, non-political network, because he's surrounded by right-wingers. Mike Adams, the health ranger, I mean, gosh, he's a scientist. He's doing a lot of great work for the past 20, 30 years for freedom. You know, and he's surrounded by people who are just rah, 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 pro-Trump, pro-politics. It's like, don't they know all these different lobbies and interests and different things going on? A real change is never going to happen until an awakening happens within the populace. So he said to me, quote for quote, we have to transcend the system to be free from it. He realizes we need principles. Now, he's a news website. He might still talk about politics here and there, and I might want to get beyond that. You know, I have a video talking about how politics ruins everything, makes everything political. Like, you can't even play a game nowadays. You can't play a song without getting politics into the mix. It's like, gosh, can I just live my life? But nonetheless, what I'm looking for is a cultural social shift, which happens as the result of this awareness, of this consciousness. And it's not going to happen any other way. People wonder why the music is not good and the games is not good. Well, it can absolutely be good. It's going to happen from this conscious shift. Now, I have some quotes that I'm going to bring up to help clarify some of the points that I have made here. But I encourage you to check out, like I said, that video from Here's the Deal. I have it linked in the description. And also my psychology video in case you're unaware of it. If you're unaware of statism as a whole, I have some news for you. That is basically the core message of my channel, is to help people become aware of this belief system, because this is the root to all evil in this world psychologically. And again, look forward to Health Revealed and watch the trailer. I'll have that linked as well, because that will go into this in an immense detail, showing historic examples as well, so you can see all the patterns all laid out for you. And you know, it's not like we have a bias going into this research. We looked at everything related to totalitarianism, to authoritarianism, to, you know, even Aldous Huxley and George Orwell and all the different theorists and utopian theorists throughout history, looking at psychology in any which way or manner. Even people who, you know, just have experience in the system, you know, war leaders and people who are in power, and seeing how their mind shifts, not just mentally but physically. Their mind is shrinking or being malformed just by being in a position of power, what it does to people, the pressures. I mean, people are not going to look that far, but sharing it with medical practitioners and sharing with people who care will do a great deal of influence, I would say. People like Jordan Peterson, people like Brett Weinstein. There's a lot of people out there who are sharing ideas like, wow, you know, we need to get beyond the current medical model. We also need to challenge the systems that be. And everything seems really corrupt, so we got to shift all of it. And I'm here to say, wait, there isn't a political solution to this madness. There cannot be. and what about the red flag laws that Trump did? What about the jabbies that he promoted? What about this stuff? What about bombing Syria? And, he was tweeting forever that he would never do that. I mean, there's so many things that you can talk about. What about lock her up or build the wall? And it never happened. I mean, like, I knew all his positions. I held open the door at the polls. I was the biggest Trump supporter. People said, you should run for president. I have a bunch of pictures I can show you. I looked like that standard conservative. I held open the door at the polls in 2016. I had the shirt, the water bottle, all of it, right? I was in that mindset, and people are in that mindset now, and they go to the extent even of saying, God did it. God appointed him. God protected him. And using a lot of spiritual symbolism and enforcement to further ingrain their own belief system. This is all just further justification for what they believe. Now, let's bring up some of the sources here that I wanted to talk about from my book, Slavery Gone for Good, Black Book Edition. So if you want to read along with me, this is the book. Okay, we're going to go to page 46 as our first point here. And this is a quote from Henry Clark Wright, who says, "We hope now that the elections are generally over, the public mind will again become settled, and that the great questions of moral duties will again receive their due attention." And of course, he's referring to the fact that politics is not really going to help us address the deeper questions. So now that the elections are over, people can start realizing what's actually important at the end of the day. Now, in this case, he's an abolitionist, so they're talking about slavery. But that's what we're also talking about here, in fact. So let's delve deeper into this. Go to page 130. So if you go to page 130, you will see here, as great 19th century abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison tells us, our country is the world and our countrymen are all mankind. Many people break this simple wisdom in cheering on their nation and condemning other nations, unable to see the philosophical undertones of all the world's people. Many people will even acknowledge that the whole world is in a disturbed place, or that there are many divisions keeping people from their own humanity. Many people will also engage and look for different methods to help fix these conditions, i.e. elections, petitions, changing laws, paperwork, or even violence, arguing that others are not doing enough. To be outright, as the modern abolitionist that I am, I'm speaking about myself, many of these same people are simultaneously willingly supporting slavery. People support slavery for both themselves and their neighbors. These people don't know it, and when they are given signs or warnings, they don't inquire upon it. Since I am the abolitionist saying that you are the slave, though I must admit I was once among you, allow me to help you see it, if you will allow yourself to listen. It could be tempting for an abolitionist like me to yell or get frustrated seeing evil in its ignorant supporters. Yet this resistance can be expected in regards to any significant change through history. Thus, I will patiently plea for your attention in hopes that you may care for this world as much as any voluntarist does. To reiterate, I encourage you go back, if you must, to learn about the nature of slavery, but let us come to understand that the nature of slavery is merely that of government. To be clear, when I say government, what is referred to is the concept of authority, the right to rule, or involuntary hierarchy. The ruler of subjects is no different from the master of slaves. And I even go into more questions here, like if claiming 100% ownership of someone's property is slavery, what percentage isn't? If taking 100% of someone's property is theft, what percentage isn't? And I have a bunch of questions that I always share in a lot of my videos as well. And again, I encourage you to go into the psychology video, because many people will say, well, this is the way it's always been. Well, that's how people justified slavery in the past. All the same excuses and justifications for slavery could be made equally so for government. This is an open challenge to anybody who wants to address this great question. I have many quotes and many different sources here that support this interesting idea that the government is actually the source to all slavery and always has been. Well, let's continue before you guys get super triggered, because it's very possible that you individuals who are call yourselves conservatives, who say the left is always getting triggered, are also triggered, because I'm not playing the left or right or even libertarian game. I'm playing the I am myself. I just want people to be free, which is not a game. It's the reality. You can call it utopian all you want, but I am. And you having to make me sign a certain paperwork to say I live in a certain country, that's man-made. It's not natural. It's not reality. Aiden Ballou says moral power is putting forth mighty energies to abolish slavery. This is page 226. And moral power is to elevate 4 millions of degraded beings to the rank of manhood. Now listen to what he has to say here. It is exerting its multiform influence to regenerate a corrupt public sentiment and to superinduce a will in the people of the United States to let the oppressed go free. Political power hinders and obstructs the progress of this reform by every possible means. It is wedded to slavery and will uphold it till a new public opinion compels it to stand off. Political power operates through a complex and cumbrous machine with immense internal friction and very awkwardly accomplishes a small amount of good at an enormous expense. Moral power educates the people intellectually, religiously, morally, socially, and industrially. Political power tickles their ambition, uses up their facilities, consumes their substance, and punishes a few of their grossier crimes. They're basically, and just before I continue, politics feeds off the philosophers. They take the moral ideas, they run with it to manipulate you. This is what I mean when I say your perceptions are being played on. People worship these different people in power as though they are deity figures. And even certain pictures are taken at certain angles to make it look like this. I mean, there's a lot of theater that goes on just on the news alone, let alone what is allowed to be pumped up on social media. And, moral causes, as Alan Walsh has said, have caused the most amount of suffering in this world. But that's because they are intermixed with the political system. People say, well, my idea is so great, I need to use this if I go to power with it, right? Let's bring this to a position of authority. And once they mix their beliefs, their moral ideas, with that of this idea of the right to rule, or statism, they can create the number one cause of unnatural death known as democide. And that is very problematic. I mean, it's also the same with religion, right? Religion and morals, you can also differentiate the two, but religion used with politics generates the same results. These people are wrong, I'm right. I want to do things this way. These people are doing things in other ways. Let's oppress them. Let's take it out on them. And it's a very divisive mentality. And we don't need to live in that mentality. We can move entirely beyond it. Like Mike said, we can totally transcend the system to be free from it, actually free. And so moral power is busy in the nursery, in the schoolhouse, academy, and college, in the laboratory, the library, the study, the hall of science, the meeting house, the conference room, and the sick chamber. Political power is busy managing caucuses, overseeing elections, legislating, holding courts, guarding prisoners, hanging murderers, punishing criminals, and executing all manner of legal processes. Think of the authors, editors, and publishers of their works, from the alphabetical primer to the huge folio, the textbooks, the histories, the biographies, scientific repositories, encyclopedias, fiction, romance, and sentiment, and every variety of prose and verse, all that a man knows, thinks, imagines, or suspects, written and printed in countless volumes, annuals, quarterlies, monthlies, weeklies, and dailies. This is why politics relies on the media. The game is not in politics, guys. The game is in the media. This is why Mark Passio is training more people to become content creators. Because when you shift the media, the culture, the social fabric of this reality, and you inspire people to become greater and become their own content creators, and not seek positions of authority, not use political power, but actually using the media to say, we don't need that, that right there is a huge threat to the system, right? Educating people to be the governor of themselves, to be the doctor of themselves, to be the scientist of themselves. My gosh, we live in an age of infinite knowledge and wisdom. Why aren't we using it? Why aren't we emphasizing it, and people will say, well, people are never going to do that. People will say, oh, this is all utopian, this is never going to happen. They're giving you an excuse for our consciousness to be concealed. They're giving you an excuse for us not to evolve to our greater potential. They recognize our greater potential, and then they say, well, we can never achieve it. They literally are the very thing that is preventing and slowing our progress from our inevitable conclusion, which is life and death, which is nature. Everything recycling back to the earth, and all these concepts and ideas and translations and ideologies not really meaning a single stinking thing, because it's all man-made and it's not truthful. Truth doesn't have an ideology. Natural law is not written by man. Morality is not decided by man purely. And if it were, then we can just do whatever we want, and we can be the gods of this world, but we recognize we're not, because there's consequences to our actions. There's laws that we have to live by. So if we understand our psychology, we understand the effects of our behavior, then we would say, let's prevent casualty and let's not repeat history in causing more casualty. Right? And let's reduce harm to the maximum. How do we do that? We prevent the manifestation of evil through the belief systems that enable it. And that brings us back to statism and back to our understanding of psychology. Really hope you look into it. I hope you're interested, because when you understand psychology, you understand also your own relationships, not just with yourself, but other people around you. If people are taking advantage of you, if you're in a toxic relationship, if you're in addiction, if you're being deceived one way or another through different ideologies, even if it isn't politics, right? It's simply about being yourself and being honest. And so, anyways, to continue here, he says, if one of the former times could say with truth, let me write the ballads of the nation, and I care not who writes the laws, what shall we think of the concurrent influence of education and literature acting upon the people of this country through all these appliances? So there's right there a challenged question that Aidan Ballou is asking you, individual who still believes that we need laws to tell people how to live their own lives, and that's going to make people moral. We can't make people moral. Right? It has to be influenced inside of them. There has to be an inspiration take place. People have to be willing, say, yeah, I'm going to learn by example. This is a leader, somebody I want to look up to. This is voluntary, and not saying, man, this guy is the best leader, and all these other people who don't think so, well, they have to be imposed upon. They have to be controlled because they're idiotic, they're ridiculous, they don't know what they're talking about. Everybody believes what they believe for a reason. And when you see that there's beauty, there's uniqueness, it's not something to fear. That's why you do your own thing, you stay in your own lane, and you leave people alone. You live and let live. If you say you care about freedom, then give it to everybody. And don't say that you have the choice to be free and you can be free to do what you want, but other people can't be free to think or say what they want. It's insane, right? Be reciprocal here and without contradiction. He says, what has political power to compare with it? Voluntary associations, charitable, humane, philanthropic, and moral reform societies of every description. All these are instrumentalities developed and employed by moral power, and who can estimate the good they have done or the evil they have prevented? Good question, because really, is it easy to measure the amount of impact that comes from all these books and encyclopedias, scientific repositories? I mean, gosh, they've done so much for humanity. It's hard to really say what exactly it has done for us, but instead we want to give the credit and say, well, politics is what's changing that. Absolutely not. Again, this is why everything has to become political. You have to start mixing your agenda into the science, and then the science becomes corrupted. Why are we doing that? Right? Let's look at science. Let's let science lead the way. Let's let morality lead the way. Let's not have our agenda, our ego, our bias lead the way. And if we did that, we'd have a free market of competing ideas. We wouldn't have monopolies. We wouldn't have people saying this is the way that has to be and you have to follow orders and suppress your conscience. That requires a superstition. That requires indoctrination. And I don't want to see that world, because again, that is not authentic. That is not encouraging the individual to live their own lives from their own pursuits, and they may be the next genius for all you know. They could be the next Tesla. They can be the next greatest inventor, like Buckminster Fuller, who said that if we want to change the old, we have to literally create the new. But so many people are focused on fixing the old. Let's keep adding more bandages on. Oh, wait, maybe we can just get in that system and then maybe we can repair it from the inside out. It's like, no, just show the new system. It's beyond repair. There is no repair to that system, because it is not a system that is voluntary to begin with. It's not a business, it's not an organization, it's not a school. It, by its nature, is oppressive. It is slavery. It always will be, it always has been. The euphemisms have changed, the language has changed, and it doesn't change the nature of that system. So anyways, we have Stanley Milgram, who's a psychologist that I feature in my psychology video. And these quotes I don't think I include in here, but he says a substantial proportion of people do what they are told to do, irrespective of the content of the act, and without limitations of conscience, so long as they perceive that the command comes from a legitimate authority. He said, I would say, on the basis of having observed 1,000 people in his experiments and having my own intuition shaped and informed by these experiments, that if a system of death camps were set up in the United States of the sort we had seen in Nazi Germany, one would find sufficient personnel for those camps in any medium-sized American town. So that means it can happen any moment now. Even worse, the most populist, patriotic, loyal, everybody loves types of leaders are the most deceiving. People are more willing to order follow. People are more willing to go to war because they trust the individual. Trust is used against people for reasons of power. So people are saying, yeah, we got to go to war to defeat these people because our leader's doing the right thing. I mean, we've seen many times throughout history where leaders go in and they do good things for the people. That can be very dangerous, because although you say, well, they're doing good things for the people, it can create an atmosphere where people are very likely to order follow and then go to war against everybody else, because everybody else is going to go to war with you, especially if you live in a world where it's interconnected and there's certain countries controlling other countries. I mean, World War II wasn't a long time ago, and many people worshipped Hitler just as that figure, and he rebooted the economy and made everything great for Germany, but at the expense of many millions of lives. And many nations came in, attacked it, and destroyed it. I mean, this is going to happen again and again throughout history. This is just a repeat. He says, Stanley Milgram says, each individual possesses a conscience which to a greater or lesser degree serves to restrain the unimpeded flow of impulses destructive to others. But when he merges his person into an organizational structure, a new creature replaces autonomous man, unhindered by the limitations of individual morality, freed of humane ambition, mindful only of the sanctions of authority. Authority runs his mind. It completely disregards his own conscience, his own morality. And again, in this study, I mean, it's over 90% compliance rate, and this was repeated all throughout the world. So if you say it's not scientific, I mean, I compile it all in my documentary. And then we go over how we can prevent it, because there were people who said, no, we don't need to do it. So if there's people who clearly refused to do it, and they said their reasons were because they looked at history, then why can't we share that knowledge with people? So people are like, well, let's add more money to education. Let's make our education system better. No, we don't need an education system. We need a awakening, a conscious shift, and it happens from you. Sharing it with your neighbors, with your friends, your family, living the solution, using permaculture, saying, hey, we aren't taught about this, so I'm just going to show you what it looks like, what it is, and you can think for yourself. The neuro-linguistic programming technique of, people will do what they know is best for themselves. So bring it into their awareness, and they will choose it if they have the choice. See, people believe they have no choice, so they play the political game because they see it as the only choice to creating change in this world. It is certainly not the only choice. They create their own limitations. Milgram says some people treat systems of human origin and maintenance as if they existed above and beyond any human agent, beyond the control of whim or human feeling. The human element behind agencies and institutions is denied, and similarly, these people who go in power and the people who follow them treat this America and certain countries and certain flags and nationalities as though it is above human origin. That's why they're also referring constantly to God anointing them and putting certain documents in place when clearly they're not made by God. And of course, he also talks about the problem with democracies. He says, in democracies, men are placed in office through popular elections, yet once installed, they are no less in authority than those who get there by other means. And as we have seen repeatedly, the demands of democratically installed authority may also come into conflict with conscience. The importation and enslavement of millions of black people, the destruction of the American Indian population, the internment of Japanese Americans, the use of napalm against civilians in Vietnam are all harsh policies that originated in the authority of a democratic nation and were responded to with the expected obedience. In each case, voices of morality were raised against the action in question, but the typical response of the common man was to obey orders. The common man, the everyday person, even the brightest, amazing people, again, their goodness is used and turned against them. In fact, people in power, you often see psychopaths, they feed off of really good people. That's their target. You know, we worry about children, we worry about human trafficking. What's happening? They go for the most innocent. They go for the people who are the most gullible. And you can see that as like a right brain extreme being controlled by a left brain extreme. And I see some people even making justifications online saying everything has duality, left versus right. So clearly that justifies us having a left versus right system in politics. Like what? Just because of our human anatomy, all of a sudden we have to, you know, use a system that is created by man imposed upon everybody else. Like, what is the abstractions people make? If there's any disagreement, just let people live their own lives in peace. My goodness. And if there is disagreement, show by example, educate, but to say, well, this is the way it has to be, if you don't like it, you're going to be thrown in jail, you're going to be violated upon. I mean, that's insane. That is slavery, controlling my own property. I've talked to many people about these different issues, and they'll straight up say to me, yeah, you know, violence is justified. Some, if they get down to it, they get quite nervous, so they start, you know, making a lot of interesting contradictive statements to me. And, you know, I don't like to go all public about it and start saying all these different examples and different people, or even put them on a spotlight online, because I just don't think that's genuine. But, you know, genuine. But, you know, people will say all sorts of things to basically say that it's fine, you know, that I should be violated upon and I should not keep what I earn. And I say, well, then what is ownership? And then they start coming up with concepts like collective ownership, and that everybody owns this. It's like, what? Like, how do you keep track of that as property? You know, it's almost insane the concepts people will make to justify the violence against a single individual, as if they are not in charge of their own life. They are absolutely in charge of their own life. If you recognize a slave owns themselves and simply were unempowered and unintelligent and unable to do so, you wouldn't say, well, I guess we have to just change the master, make his condition better, and then gradually get to a place where he can be free. You would say, let's empower him and make him free now, because that is the truthful condition. And because we're empowering him, he can then rule his own life, and then we can leave him alone. We never have to bother him again. It's just like when Frederick Douglass said, hey, I'm going to free myself, and leaving you, I left what belonged to you, and then I gave myself what belonged to me. And leaving you, I've done no wrong to you, and I, you know, haven't done any wrong to myself. I haven't done any right to myself either, because simply slavery shouldn't exist in the first place. So, like, why am I even talking about it? Why am I even doing it? Slavery, this wrongdoing is an illusion, because it's not true. I own myself. Slavery is not a truth. So many people concern government and the authority of government to be a truth, and so unquestionable a reality without it. And so, you know, when I say I want to live free, I'm not harming anybody for saying that everybody else, you know, should want to do whatever they want to do with their own life. I'm leaving them alone. I'm not telling anyone what to do. I'm just saying I want to do something for myself, but I'm not doing violence to anyone. I'm not hurting anyone. But somebody will say, well, you're not contributing to this or that. It's because I don't want to, based on my own labor, based on my own time and energy, unless you say that you control my own time, my energy, and my labor. Well, if you control my labor, how far do I have to go until I have to say that I'm a slave? I mean, it doesn't take many steps from there, right? So I invite you to learn about these different ideas and see their perceptions that are being played on in the world, see the psychology, and see that a conscious shift is required, as George Carlin and as all these great individuals have said throughout history. It's not the first time it's been said, and it's certainly not the last, because more and more people are starting to see it. And like I said, we win either way. Part of this is also having love and sympathy for all people, because I would never say that somebody is necessarily brainwashed, because like I said many times, I was one of the individuals who, fell into that mindset that I'm speaking of. So really, I call it a belief system, and one that we're trained and indoctrinated into. That's just the reality. But does that make us have to identify with it? No, not necessarily. And, many people are very defensive about different issues according to how much it affects them personally. And again, that's where this ego comes into play. And becoming aware of that allows us to recognize sacrifice as necessary for truth to take place, because truth can care less about your feelings. Funny enough, that quote, also comes from Ben Shapiro, who also, just like Charlie Kirk, refuses to debate topics that are really pressing against their own worldview. And, these are very standardized conservatives that are put out there in the front lines. And so I'll just summarize here with some of the final pages from my book, page 428. It was war that made people slaves under government. Then it was indoctrination and laws that conditioned their slavery. Then it was different forms of government, psychological manipulation, and lesser forms of slavery, i.e. chattel slavery, that made them liken their slavery and see the lesser forms as the greater, challenging one system to the next until they never saw they were under slavery. Yet to strike at the foundation of slavery, the rest will fall with it. If war and government creates slavery and chaos, then love and voluntarism creates freedom and order. I have this at the end of my book on purpose, because it is essentially summarizing a lot of what is in the book. And again, if you're new to these concepts, I can understand the confusion. If you have to rewind, go right ahead. But war and government and slavery have been married for pretty much ever, as long as they have existed. And it is totally possible for people to live voluntarily, as they do most of their lives. They only create an exception in politics because they're trained into that belief system, or because they were captured by some other government that made them traumatized into the fear to then be indoctrinated, and then they had kids, which then thought it was just natural and necessary and kept the loop going. See, the children of slaves become automatic slaves. The children of citizens become automatic citizens. A never-ending feedback loop to justify something that never actually needed to exist in the first place. And so you assume it to be natural and necessary when it may absolutely not be. And so, that's why I also say here, freedom looks impossible to the slave when they start to see it's possible they are no longer a slave. To see past evils as so obvious now, be not surprised to see present evils as not so obvious. Slavery keeps us from freedom, but freedom keeps us from slavery. Abolitionism is the missing link that helps us escape the feedback loop of slavery, that feedback loop that keeps us in that NPC world. That robotic programming helps us express, and that's where you see all the creativity and the magic that happens from people using their imagination to then make songs, music, video games, everything else. That's what's going to reboot this culture. And so we learn to practice freedom directly without compromise. Ask yourself these two questions. Were you created to be free or to be a slave? And are you nurtured into being free or being a slave? Do you have any aspect within you that creates any justification for evil whatsoever? If you recognize it's evil, why do you ever say it's a necessary evil? And if you say there are evils that will happen, okay, but to say that evil should continue in any degree means what? There's some sort of permissibility, or there's no other possibility. Well, that would be wrong, because absolutely there are. All it takes is asking ourselves the question, and then seeing the possible reality, putting it into perspective, enacting it, seeing how other people are living it, like Jim Gale from Food Forest Abundance, and you have a beautiful life, right? And so that is what this is. As I say in this page as well, All the culture will simply remind us of our former history, as does the abolitionism of the past. If government were allowed to justify slavery, then it can justify any form of crime. Take heed of these warnings. If society has chosen slavery, they have chosen death over liberty. If our minds create the world and the masses give power to the few, then change the minds of the masses. We are all just people. A voluntary world is possible. The core message is this: ending the belief in slavery is not a utopian ideal. It is a reality we must learn to embrace. Freedom, it's a reality. Slavery, an illusion, a belief. Same thing with government, same thing with any man-made system that is being imposed upon you, that you assume to be natural and necessary. Absolutely not. That is what makes it dangerous. Let's not take the position of presuming to be gods in this world, presuming to be masters over other human beings. Let's let people live their own lives. All people, doesn't matter who they are. If you truly have love in your heart, you expand it unconditionally to everybody, regardless of any justification, regardless of the circumstance, because you know the solution will be worse than the problem. And you know that if there's any sort of contradiction. So when people talk about borders, that's the solution right there. Unconditional love, which means let people be. Don't try to fix the problem. Don't try to make it worse. Don't try to, continue the problem. Just let people be. Learn how to practice Wu Wei, Taoist, ancient mastery, right? It takes courage. Not a lot of people understand it, as Lao Tzu, the great master of ancient China, has said, but yet it is one that when you understand, can create peace in every aspect of your life. Learn how to let go. Keep tugging on the plant, it won't grow, even though you think it might help, right? You have to learn how to let it be. That's when you get the maximum amount of output from it, and it grows in its best condition. So, there you have it. Thank you guys for watching. This is Corey Angelot. Nature is the answer. TheLiberator.us. Go to TheLiberator.us.